The goal for each podcast episode is for us to be honest, open, and transparent. While conversations do include mental health, this show does not replace support from a licensed mental health professional. If you feel triggered by any of these conversations, please feel free to take a break from the episode and check in with your support system.
The first thing that I thought of didn't have to do with any mental health disorders. It didn't have to do with anything even mental health related. But the best thing about teaching mental health, and the reason in my opinion it's so important, is because at the end of the day, it teaches kids how to be compassionate and empathetic. And there's nothing more important than to learn the importance of being kind at a young age. And there's no better way to learn how to be kind than practicing supporting people, practicing understanding other people who may be facing challenges that you yourself are not facing.
Welcome to another episode of the Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health podcast. Thank you for tuning in to episode number 41. I'm your host, Abraham Scully, and you are tuned in to the podcast for young adults and leaders in education wanting to learn how to create safe spaces for honest dialogue about mental health. Today, we have a very special episode, one that I'm really excited to bring to you, our listeners. As you've heard in past episodes, I've had my own challenges with mental health and for a while have been undiagnosed and had no idea that I dealt with mental health issues. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited to bring this conversation to you today, because a fact is that 50% of mental health disorders are present before the age of 14. 50%. And as I'm thinking about that statistic, I'm wondering how many of those young people were not even diagnosed, did not even reach out for support to receive a diagnosis and be treated. So this conversation is critically important. Today we have a special guest to share a little bit about his story and the work he's doing as a mental health advocate. I recently found out about this amazing organization doing great work, and I had to bring Seth on to introduce himself to you. So make sure you're also tuned in till the end, because he's going to share a really cool announcement that you or someone you know can benefit from. His organization, CultureChange, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that strives to promote access to mental health resources through policy change and education. Him and his team, they work with school districts, childcare programs, and post-secondary institutions to improve the access to mental health resources and educational opportunities. So without further ado, I want to bring to the stage, to the mic, Seth Nilsen. Seth, how's it going?
It's going amazing. It's great to be on.
Awesome. I'm glad to have you on. I was really impressed to meet you, a few weeks ago and learn about CultureChange and the work that you're doing. And I think it's so important that we get the word out, especially when we are aware of organizations who are looking to advocate for those who need mental health resources, but also have systems in place and programs in place that we can implement to create that impact that we're hoping to have for our younger generation. So I'm excited to have you on. And before we dive into a little bit more about your work and what you're up to these days, I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself. What takes up most of your time and energy these days? And yeah, we'll start there.
Sounds great. So I'm currently actually a K-8 physical education teacher. And so that's my full-time job. And then after that day ends, after I'm all done with teaching, I go home and do a few hours a night of work on CultureChange and always work on expanding on connections, working with our sponsor, the Jordan Clark Foundation, and just trying to create tangible solutions to to solve the mental health crisis that there is in this country.
Awesome. I love it. And it's so important, right, that we get the word out, especially when we know of organizations like yours. I'd love to hear a little bit about the background because one thing that I found in doing these interviews and being able to learn about the work that so many amazing people are doing, we actually had Sarah, one of the co-founders of the Jordan Clark Foundation, which you just mentioned, who is sponsor for the framework that CultureChange has developed on episode 21. So if anyone wants to revisit that conversation, you can check that out. But one thing I find with those who become advocates is that this topic is close to home, whether it's a personal experience that we've had or a loved one that was affected by mental illness or any mental health condition. I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and how you got into the work and what makes you so passionate about what you do as an advocate.
For sure. So with me, I'll say there's two things. I'll begin with my personal experience. I know growing up, I had social anxiety, and that started in, I want to say, fifth or sixth grade. And mental health just wasn't a topic that me or even the people around me really knew a lot about or felt comfortable talking about. And so I wasn't diagnosed with social anxiety until I turned 18. I went to therapy for the first time the week after I graduated high school. And so at that point, I just knew that I wasn't going to be able to be successful and just live the life that I want to live if I didn't address my social anxiety. And so over the next 4 years in college, I was able to put myself in situations that I always tended to avoid growing up and expose myself to situations like public speaking or like being on a podcast, for example, that just thinking back to like seventh grade me or like 10th grade me, even something like this would be so impossible. But by just really taking the energy and time to educate myself and go to therapy, it's something that's really helped my life. And I know that if CultureChange and myself can help educate and provide educational opportunities for those who don't have them, then hopefully a lot of people aren't going to have a story like me, and their story ends up with them reaching out for help in fifth or sixth grade and not having to reach out for help at age 18. And then my other motivation that motivates me a bit more is I do have some people close to me who also have mental health challenges. And I think that just watching them throughout their day-to-day and week-to-week lives, watching how inspirational their triumphs are something that motivates me, seeing them more than I could ever motivate myself.
I love it. And thank you for sharing your story and your experience and the support that you're providing for those closer to you who deal with mental health conditions and the continual work that you continue to do for yourself. Because as someone who deals with a mental health condition myself, I know that it takes work and it's like daily work. So I can only imagine the commitment it takes. So I commend you on that. And I appreciate you for sharing your story. One thing that you mentioned that I do want to point out is throughout my education, and I don't know if it's different, whether private school or whatever the case is, but I went to public school and I don't remember ever taking a class or learning anything about mental health, nothing about anxiety, depression, how to manage stress. It just wasn't a part of the education that we received. I mean, we learned about so many other things, but how to cope wasn't one of those things. But when I think about it as I, got older, I said, well, that's one of the most important things that we need to know is, how to cope with life stressors because stress is inevitable. And this is what you are bringing to educational systems is that mental health education. But if you can share, because we also have teachers that listen to this podcast, faculty, staff, and they may or may not be in a position where they can incorporate mental health education as they would like to, but they're looking for simple ways to support their students because they see that their students deal with mental health challenges. What are some simple ways that someone listening can incorporate mental health education in the work that they do in schools, whether they're a teacher, a dean working with students, but they are working with students and want to help them and support them in that way?
hmm So the first few things that come to my mind are just being open about it. I know actually when I was a sophomore in college, my swimming teacher, I took a swimming class as a sophomore in college. On the first day of that swimming class, the one of the very first things my swimming instructor said was that if anybody ever needs to talk about anything related to mental health or any stressors on their mind, that she's always got an open door. And it sounds extremely basic. It's a very, very small thing. It can take up like 20 seconds of a day. But even just letting your students know that you're a person they can go to, it's something that can be super meaningful to whether it's a kindergarten kid or, in my case, a college student. So that's one of the universal strategies that I think any teacher, any grade level, any content can do. And then the other more specific one is, as a teacher myself, I know at the end of some classes, I've got maybe an extra 5 minutes. And during that extra 5 minutes, I'm able to do a quick mental health activity, whether that's a discussion, whether that's a group activity. I know in the curriculum that we write, one of my all-time favorite activities is having prompts on all four walls and then having the students divide up into four groups, rotate around, and answer and add on to their peers' their answers. So
Ah,
so then at the very end, each group shares their own original idea, but they also add on with ideas that their peers added onto theirs. And so the question can be as simple as, what are signs of a bad day? What things can you do to turn around a bad day? What does it feel like or mean to be anxious? And like giving a lot of signs and symptoms. So it works on finding emotions. And then on top of that, it's discussion based. I I know when I had a health class in 10th grade in high school, a lot of it was like worksheet based. And I remember as a 10th grade student, I would match the definition of depression like with the word. And I learned what depression was. Like I could, as a 10th grade student, tell you what depression was. But if I was feeling a sign or symptom, I didn't know how to articulate it. And so by just being conscientious about the methods of teaching is, in my opinion, the most important thing, because it's all about practicing that conversation and destigmatizing mental health through that conversation.
that is so powerful because so many things are happening in just that incorporating that exercise alone. Students are supporting each other, right? And
Mhm.
they're feeling validated, they're feeling heard. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can do for anyone, dealing with a mental health challenge or not, is being able to listen. And I can just imagine how that exercise that you're taking your students through, how that is impacting them in that present moment, but it's also teaching them how they can continue to support their peers, once they get older. So I think it's really powerful. One of the things, so I actually taught sixth grade a couple years ago. And one of the things that I incorporated, very similar to what you mentioned, is I had my wife create this big whiteboard. And on the whiteboard, it said, "Today I'm feeling," and then I had a bunch of different like faces. So like happy face, angry face, calm face, sad face, silly, excited. And so for the first 3 to 4 minutes before we started class that day, I had every one of my students pull out their journals. I gave them all journals at the beginning of the year. and they would use that time to quietly kind of sit with themselves, take a deep breath, and analyze where they are in that moment and just write about it, and kind of just do that each day. And then weeks go by and they can kind of look back on their entries and see how they were doing throughout the year. So simple things like that really help the student to become self-aware, which is a very valuable skill to have. But then also, I think in what you are sharing, Seth, is having those practical tools that they can utilize. So once they have that self-awareness, they can do something about it. Like, what are some ways to get through a bad day? Like, that's huge, right? Teaching someone how to do that, but empowering them because they're coming up with those answers and responses. So good. So you mentioned a little bit about the curriculum that you created, you and Culture Change, and you shared a couple of the prompts that you provide in that curriculum. Why do you believe it's so important to teach mental health education when it comes to K through 12?
Well, I believe that for a lot of reasons, but I'll begin by saying just knowing in my own experience that that was something that I could reiterate, but I couldn't. I was taught it without understanding the tools, without like fully grasping the concepts. And so, one of my primary drivers, like during the curriculum writing process, was thinking of the best teaching practices. Are the kids in their desk? Are they standing up, moving? Are they learning something that can transfer outside the classroom? And so that's one thing just through my own experiences. And then just bouncing right back actually to the story that you told with your sixth grade students. Um, just that being able to identify your emotions is the first step in like learning how to handle your emotions. And my personal favorite part of the curriculum is a tool that I call our ISR tracking chart. It's our individual stress response tracking chart. And there are two different charts. There's one chart for grades K through 5 and one chart for grades 6 through 12. And the K through 5 one is a lot more simple. It is just matching emotions with feelings, tracking how students are feeling on a daily basis. And then as this as the student gets older, they they fill out a more comprehensive stress response tracking chart. And in 6th through 12th grade, they analyze their stressors, how it's making them feel just like the younger kids, but they add on with ideas on how they're going to respond to the stress in the future, analyzing was their stress response healthy or unhealthy. And so by just having those like emotion or stress response tracking charts, then that actually gives the students a way to practice the concepts that the teachers are teaching, and it's working in the best teaching practices opposed to just a worksheet and lecture.
I love it. And one of the things that I see a lot of times is whether it's a faculty member, staff member, leader in an organization, there is oftentimes a hesitation to talk about mental health or bring up the conversation because many people believe that you have to be an expert to help, right? And that's not necessarily the case when we're talking about having the conversation about mental health and providing basic education. And what I love about the curriculum that you all have developed is even for the person who knows nothing about mental health, they're able to utilize the tools that you provide in the curriculum and in the framework to implement these skills with their students that helps them to improve their mental health, but then also gives the one who's facilitating the conversation the confidence to engage in these conversations. But again, there's so many people who are afraid to even have the conversation because they believe, well, I didn't go to school to be a mental health professional. I don't have the knowledge or the expertise. What do you have to say to that person who's really skeptical to even talk about mental health because they are afraid that they may not know how to support or how to facilitate a conversation?
Great question. So, so with these conversations, I personally think that all schools should have to teach a specific amount of mental health content. I don't believe that's necessarily feasible with the amount of current health education and the amount of mental health currently being taught at each grade level respectively. But I think that the number one thing in regards to facilitating these conversations is just to think first and let yourself understand that it's not even as much about mental health as it is about letting your students know that you're there for them. And I personally, when I was thinking about why is it so important to write a mental health curriculum, the first thing that I thought of didn't have to do with any mental health disorders. It didn't have to do with anything even mental health related. But the best thing about teaching mental health, and the reason in my opinion it's so important, is because at the end of the day, it teaches kids how to be compassionate and empathetic. And there's nothing more important than to learn the importance of being kind at a young age. And there's no better way to learn how to be kind than practicing supporting people, practicing understanding other people who may be facing challenges that you yourself are not facing.
I love the way you mentioned not even thinking about it as mental health, but how it impacts the individual's entire life. Because we talked about, in the beginning of the conversation, 50% of mental health disorders are present before the age of 14. But the reality is that we all have mental health.
Yes.
We may not all have a mental health disorder, but we all have mental health. And mental health is simply a state of well being. It's how we think, how we feel, how we behave, how we interact in the world, how we overcome stressors and challenges, how we interact with others. All of that is mental health. And that's something that we experience daily. So it's just about learning how can we be more effective in improving our mental health and being aware of it. So that's so critical, and it helps to normalize the conversation when you look at it that way. So
Agreed.
thanks for sharing that. So we talked a little bit about the curriculum. I do want you to share more about the school mental health framework, because I had a chance to learn from you what Culture Change is doing and the impact that you all are making. And at the end of the show, I do want to share the announcement that you have coming up. But tell us a little bit about the school mental health framework. What does it entail? And just overall, give us an overview.
This podcast is powered by Speaks to Inspire, the mental health solution for young adults suffering in silence. Did you know that students who experience shame and hold negative perceptions about mental health conditions are less likely to reach out for help? By marrying the art of storytelling with mental health education, Speaks to Inspire is creating safe spaces through comprehensive, high-impact programs that help colleges, universities, and schools increase engagement and retention. Learn how you can bring a Speaks to Inspire speaker to your campus by visiting www.speakstoinspire.com/speakers.
Yeah. So our school mental health framework in its easiest form is a compilation of curriculum, screening tools, and policy recommendations. The objective is to maximize each school's social emotional learning environment. I personally believe that the first step in solving our mental health crisis is by creating the absolute best possible social emotional learning environment. And that doesn't just mean teaching mental health to students, it also means incorporating comprehensive mental health education and educator professional development courses. It includes having comprehensive school mental health policy and also providing school-based mental health practitioners with the absolute best possible resources and the best means of helping students who need it most. And so our school mental health framework, it includes, as I said, the curriculum for students, but it also includes curriculum for teachers. Along with both of those two curriculums, there's corresponding PowerPoints, and the K through 12 curriculum for students is standards based. It's based with the CDC National Health Education Standards, and each lesson has multiple standards attached to it. That's the first thing. And then all of the lessons are scaffolded. So the information that students learn in one grade, that is going to carry on to what they're taught the next year, which I think is awesome. And yeah, I mean, just think the combination of all of the materials. There's also a digital mental health course for schools to add to their online learning platforms.
Oh, nice.
So the compilation of everything included in the package is what can maximize each school's social emotional learning environment and tackle the mental health crisis one school district at a time.
Love it. And another thing that I love about CultureChange and the school mental health framework is that it's a teacher who is designing this. So as a teacher, you understand the different challenges that come with lesson planning and developing curriculum. And so with that perspective, I'm sure you're providing a tool that helps educators to kind of plug and play, right? They receive all the tools, the resources, and they can implement it effectively into what they're already doing. So thanks so much for sharing that. And I have another question before I ask you to finally share about the announcement coming up with CultureChange and the school mental health framework. But I like to ask this question to all of our guests because I'm always curious as to how we view mental health. So, what is mental health to you, Seth?
That's a great question. To me, it's something that everybody has. And I think that in my conversations with friends, my family, and students, oftentimes people focus on the downside, the disorders, the mental health challenges that people face, but it's just as important to focus on the other side and finding ways to live your happiest life and just be happy, because tying together, as I said earlier, with the whole concept of the curriculum is behind everything else. It's important to be kind, and being kind lens allows oneself to be happy, but it also creates a community. It creates a group of people that are happy to be around each other. And so it all ties into, there are two sides of mental health, but to me, I think of always, how can we address the mental health challenges that individuals and our society faces as a whole, but how can we accept that? How can we find tangible solutions? And how can we work to make sure that everybody has the best mental health that they can be, which oftentimes may look different for everybody, but it's important to advocate for yourself and for others as well.
Thank you for such a great response to that. So, the school mental health framework you mentioned includes a curriculum, screening tool recommendations, policy recommendations, and I personally believe that every school, K through 12, should implement some sort of mental health education because it's a part of our life. And why not teach, kids young how to have conversations about mental health, understanding mental health, and then be in the better position to take care of their mental health. So, Seth, you mentioned about the school mental health framework, and it includes a curriculum, screening tool recommendations, policy recommendations. And I know that there's this really big announcement coming up in March, and I'd love our listeners to learn about how they can implement this framework if they are a teacher, faculty member, staff member, or someone working in the school district. and they'd like to bring this to their school. So can you talk a little bit more about how that could be possible?
For sure. So I'm super excited to announce that between March 15th and March 30th, CultureChange will be distributing our school mental health framework to all schools, all teachers, all faculty members that reach out and set up a preliminary meeting. The first meeting doesn't have to take place in this time frame. It just has to be scheduled. And we'll be distributing all of our mental health resources at no cost to the schools, the district, whoever reaches out. The objective of this is to make as big of an impact as possible. And I'm super excited. I really believe we'll be able to distribute over $100,000 worth of mental health resources in this time frame. And it all works towards the goal of solving the mental health crisis. It's not about raising awareness. It's not about necessarily starting the conversation, but I often like to use the term finishing the conversation. I know that over the last few years, people have done an amazing job of bringing awareness to the topic, and that's super great. But at this point in where we stand as a country and where mental health stands as an issue, it's time to bring a solution. And this is the first step to solving the mental health crisis by implementing a framework with comprehensive education for teachers and students, by implementing comprehensive mental health policy, and also by giving school-based mental health professionals the best resources that they can to help the students who need it the most. So I'm super excited about this opportunity, and I can't wait for it to get underway in a few short weeks.
Awesome, Seth. And so what you're saying, if I'm hearing you clearly, is that if there is a teacher, administrator, staff member who's listening to this conversation and they're like, whoa, I need that in my school. What you're saying is all they need to do is reach out to you in that time frame?
Correct. So you can either message my Instagram, you can message the CultureChange Instagram at CultureChangeCC, or if it's more convenient, I personally like to do a lot of my business and planning over text message, which my phone number is 651-724-8132. I'll respond very quickly. And typically what the process looks like is the first meeting is us just getting to know each other, what practices the school or district is looking forward to implementing, if there's one specific thing or if they're looking at implementing the whole framework as a whole. And then after we establish what we're trying to accomplish, then the next meetings oftentimes include a school principal or a district administrator.
Love it. And did I hear you say free?
I did say free, and it's at no cost to the schools, no cost to teachers, no cost to anybody who reaches out. And it's also not covered by my sponsors, so there's no one making any money off this. It's just
Wow.
it's just CultureChange trying to make an impact and really leave a mark
And change the culture. So
Yeah.
with that, it doesn't get any better than that, you all. So I'm just, thinking myself as I'm listening to you, what administrators do I know? What teachers do I know? And just, thinking about I need to reach out to them and let them know that this is available and accessible to them, because we can end the mental health crisis, like you mentioned, Seth, through education.
Yes.
And really through getting to solution oriented impact. So ultimately, we don't have young people dying by suicide. We don't have young people struggling and suffering silently. And they know that there are resources. So thank you so much for the work that you do, Seth. You and CultureChange, your team there, it's very much appreciated, you coming on and sharing about yourself and about the work. Is there anything that I may have missed that you'd like to share? I'll give you some space now to share anything else.
For sure. I appreciate this podcast, this whole platform. It's been a great conversation, and it's been a pleasure. That's the first thing I want to say. And then the second thing I want to say is that oftentimes I hear, oh, my school already has a mental health program. Oh, my district already is partnering with this mental health nonprofit to implement this, whether it's education, whether it's a safe space. And I believe one of the most beneficial and successful ways of maximizing a social emotional learning environment is by having what I call a dual programming. Just because there's one program already in place, there's oftentimes room for programs to overlap and benefit one another. I know a lot of programs, for example, begin in grades 9, and a few start in 6th grade, but a lot of mental health programming begins in 9th grade. So what CultureChange is able to do is we're able to provide that earlier content, the earlier screening tool and policies to help even younger kids and work with existing programs. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, one of the most excitement, the things that have caused the most excitement in my recent meetings with student council members, curriculum coordinators, is the idea that oftentimes the best method of instruction is peer-to-peer. And I know I'm working with one school right now who they're working towards scheduling their high school students field trips to their elementary schools in the district. So those high school students can learn the content first, learn the curriculum, and then break it down and explain it in more simple terms to the kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth grade students.
Wow.
So just being creative. Just because I provide all of this, it doesn't mean that there's not going to be other great ideas sparked off of the initial curriculum. So I'm super excited to see all the ways that teachers, schools, and faculty bounce off and create other great ideas, like the peer-to-peer instruction that is oftentimes one of the most successful teaching practices.
So good. Thank you so much, Seth. And I will make sure that Seth's contact information is in the show notes. He did give us his phone number, and I'll make sure you have his email, website, and all that to reach out to Seth and bring the school mental health framework to your school. This is very important as we work to support our students. I do want to also mention in every episode, if you're listening to this and you are not aware, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is 988. So anyone can call or text 988 for 24/7 chat or phone support with a crisis counselor. It is confidential. And it's so important that we share resources. I always like to say it's better to, have the resources and not need them than to need the resources and not have them. So just becoming aware of what resources are out there. Also, if you go to speaks2inspire.com/resources, we also have additional resources there for you. And then finally, we do have a Facebook group. So if you'd like to continue this conversation and, continue to speak to other mental health advocates who are interested in unlearning the lies about mental health and increasing the amount of conversations that we're having, join the Facebook group. It's just unlearn the lies about mental health, and you'll find us. Join, and I'll make sure that you are added to the conversation. So thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Again, if you or anyone you know needs support, reach out to support. There is no shame in having mental health conditions or talking about mental health. So just want to encourage you to do what you need to do to take care of you. Thank you so much, Seth, for joining the conversation. And I hope that you all receive a lot of value and share this with a friend. Take care.